So, let me tell you a little bit about myself and how I came to be writing a book that is based on The Prisoner, or uses, if you like, the prisoner's story as a springboard from which I have told my own story. My own writing goes right back to school when I started, and I won't bore you with all the details, but the first novel I ever wrote was a school story when I was aged around about 10. It was 54 pages long, which when you're 10 years old actually is quite an achievement. I'm still proud of it. It was a science fiction story about an astronaut and his family who came across some aliens somehow. It's so far in the past now I can't remember myself, but it was about their encounter with these flipper-footed aliens. My teacher was so impressed with it, he asked, could he borrow it to show the next year's class, because I was moving on to senior school. I said, yes, of course, that's fine. And I never saw it again, or him. So I consequently don't lend books to anybody. And unfortunately, the copy, the one and only copy that I had has gone. I hope it inspired some other kids that followed me in that same class to write as well. I think also then I got a taste of how writing could be inspirational, because not only was I proud that the teacher liked the story, I thoroughly enjoyed writing it. I didn't do anything else really in the writing field apart from some scripts as a student until I'd left teaching. We certainly won't go into why, but I then got into broadcasting. And from there on, I was writing scripts. I got into journalism, so I was writing features for news. And then I got into general journalism. I was writing stories and features for magazines, newspapers, anybody that would take anything from me. I didn't write another book for quite some time. And actually, I was involved in 2 published books at that stage, but actually they were just self-help manuals. I was commissioned to write them. They weren't stories. But you know what? I had an idea in the back of my head that was fermenting. And I realized it had been fermenting ever since I'd watched The Prisoner on television in 1968. Because like you, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Like you, I was bewildered by it. And like you, I wanted more. Because I think one of the ironies of The Prisoner's story is that our mysterious intelligence operative resigned about something, was captured by some people, taken to some place that we knew very little about, and he didn't know, tried to escape. They tried to get information out of him endlessly, as we know, over 17 episodes. And they never did get it, and nor did we, because in those last 2 episodes, Once Upon a Time and Fallout, it raised more questions than answers. We knew he got away. Spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't seen it. But we didn't know really where he'd been, or who had captured him, or who was running the village, or why. And we didn't get the information about what was in his head. So I'd had this idea fermenting, as I say, in the back of my head about what could he have resigned about? What possible reason, because we know he was a man of principle, could have driven him to go to his boss's office, fling the doors open, slam his fist on the table, breaking the cup and saucer at the same time, and ranting and raving, walking up and down in front of the boss's desk, hitting the desk again, storming out. What possible thing could have done that to a man? And slowly over the years, an idea started to form, but it actually didn't form as a novel. What I had an idea for was another television program. Now, as we know, The Prisoner has been remade, and there may be more versions to come in the future. But it was the same story. And I was looking at it from a different angle. I was thinking, what about a television series that showed the story from the flip side, from the side of the people who ran the village and had captured him. What about a TV series like that, where it was told from the eyes and the mouths and the people who had done all that to him? And they would have access to his story, the one that we were all familiar with, because as we know, in the village there were cameras everywhere, microphones everywhere. Surveillance was total, which reminds me, I did mean to check the room first.
No, you're safe.
Okay, good. So you say. And I had this vision of a TV series that would be very much a spy thriller told from that angle. But even though I'd worked in broadcasting, all of that was in New Zealand. And when I came back here, I didn't have any contacts in television. So I had nobody to go to. I had no chums in ITV, for example. I didn't rub shoulders with producers. And so therefore I had no warm leads. And then what happened was COVID came along. And I hadn't let go of this idea. I thought, this really needs developing because to my knowledge, nobody else has done it. So who can do it? And actually, the person standing in front of you now decided he could do it. I thought, okay, it's not going to be made as a television series. I don't know anybody to go to. So why don't I start it as a book? And COVID, like for so many of us, gave us the opportunity to put pen to paper, or at least fingers to word processors. And so that's where I started. It took 2 years to write. I had no excuse not to, because as you know, we all had plenty of time during lockdown. And the story started to coalesce. The more I wrote, the more definitive it got. Why am I qualified to write the book? Actually, I'm not. It just goes back to the joy I got from writing that very first story at school. And I started to write this one actually not knowing where it was going, but it was a joy to write. I got right into it. And I just found that when it came time to sit at the PC and continue the story, it was immersive, got into it, completely overwhelmed by the era that it was set in. Now, as we all know, that's 1967. That's when The Prisoner would have been set, shot, and it was released the year after. So I had to, if you like, and it felt like it at times, time travel. I was living in 1967 for so much of this book. And one of the interesting things is trying to capture the zeitgeist of 40, 50 years ago, where things were different. We spoke different, we used different language, not some of the phraseology that we use today. We dressed differently, we acted differently, we had customs and ways of doing things that have, if you like, passed now. People wore hats, for example. I remember men would sometimes lift their hats to women. And there was things like, come in, walk the walk of shame, find a seat, sit down and listen. Excellent. We all remember, probably, a lot of us in this room would, not all, what a public phone box used to smell like. Yeah, nods, smiles, grimaces. Yeah, not very pleasant places to be. Apart from anything else, smoking was very prevalent. And if you remember, public phone boxes had a little striker where you could strike your match, an ashtray, had a little mirror, and they always stank of stale cigarette smoke, and worse. But let's not go there. It was things like that. And other things I was writing about how two of my characters would meet in a pub in London. And I started off thinking, right, so one of them's got a glass of wine, the other one's got a glass of wine. And then when Liz was pre-reading the story for me, along with some others who I will mention in a moment, She said, "You sure people would have been drinking wine in pubs in 1967 in Britain?" And I did some research, and yeah, somebody's shaking their head, and quite right. Actually, I couldn't find a single bar menu from 1967 that proudly boasted a selection of wines. People were drinking vermouth, sherries. There were all sorts of drinks that some of which we've forgotten now, and it's just details like that. And the more I went into it, the more the details mattered to get the zeitgeist right, so that when you read it, hopefully you're transported back to 1967 without question. Because I have read some novels that have been set a few years ago, and the language is wrong in some cases. It's just phraseology. So obviously nobody in this book is going to say OMG like we do, or let's take this offline because that wasn't even invented, and things like that. It was fun to do. It really was fun to do. And I'm now an expert in the late 1960s. It helped, of course, having been alive at that time. And as you just noticed, I still am. So, for 55 years, we've been wondering, what was The Prisoner all about? And many people before me have produced works, whether they be novels or novellas or papers, essays, and more recently, of course, with the internet, blogs, and contributing to websites, their thoughts and opinions. People, dozens and dozens of them, have entertained us with their stories. Many of them felt a need to continue the prisoner's story after where it finished. How many of you are among those where you wanted more? Let's have a show of hands. A small show of reluctant hands, but actually quite enough, I think, to make my point. So we now have a raft of books and works that have taken the prisoner's story and moved it on. Mine actually doesn't do that. I've just taken the flip side of the same story and have presented it from a different aspect. What I've had to do, because I didn't want to write a 200,000 page novel, is of necessity I've had to restrict which episodes of The Prisoner it relates to. And luckily for me, not only did Patrick McGoohan say once in an interview that there were a handful of essential episodes, a handful of episodes that he regarded as being essential, and he listed them. He said there were 7. He listed 6, and I believe, if I remember rightly, the interviewer interrupted him and we never got to find out what the 7th was. But I have read, and I've read apparently that it's been endorsed by a lot of prisoner fans that the 7 do exist, and there's a general agreement that even if you saw nothing else of the prisoner, these episodes would, if you tied them together, tell the story the way that McGoohan would have been happy with. So I've taken those 7 episodes. Do we all know what they are? We know what the first one was, right? Arrival. What's the second? Free for all. Yep, quite right, free for all. The third is what? Chimes, no, not the third. Checkmate is the third. 4th, Dance of the Dead. 5th, Chimes of Big Ben. 6th, Once Upon a Time. And 7th, Fallout. And if you string those together, they work. And there are plenty of people who have done that work for me in the past. And I've mentioned some of these people in the front of the book here, and I'll just let you know who they are as a matter of interest if you like, I'm presenting my evidence, the credentials. There are people like Robert Fairclough, Roger Langley, Dean Motter, and David Stimpson. They were very helpful to me in a lot of the work that they'd done, and also in replying to my random emails when I got in touch with them to ask, how can I stay out of court when I write this book? Because I tried to get the rights to The Prisoner, and it's owned, as some of you may know, the rights are owned by ITV now. It took a year for me to even get a reply from them. And when I did get that reply, it was quite a short response, which basically said, we will not be entering into a deal at this time. I hadn't even asked for a deal. I just said I'd like to inquire, but I got told in no uncertain terms a deal wasn't on the table. And secondly, to seek independent legal advice. Well, yeah, just for a few seconds that deflated me. I was as deflated as a white weather balloon. But it didn't stop me. It didn't stop me at all, because I did a lot more research, and I realized that the number of other prisoner-related novels, or prisoner tie-in novels, as they're called, were many, many, many. And so they had all successfully published or self-published. So I had to wonder how that happened. And those names I just read out to you, they were very helpful. Some of them did warn me that, yes, actually, some legal advice wouldn't be a bad idea. But I also did research about fan fiction. And that's what this is. Unity is a work of fan fiction. Unity, peace for all, freedom for none. It's written by me for entertainment purposes, not for profit. And that's the difference with a work of fan fiction. You must write it not for profit. Come in, make yourself at home. So, in a nutshell, I can make nothing from the book. So how does it work? Where do I get my reward? Actually, I get it from writing the book in the first place, because that was a thoroughly enjoyable process. I get it from being asked to speak here now, tonight, for example, in front of fellow prisoner enthusiasts and aficionados. I get it now that it's just been recently released in the last 2 weeks on Amazon, going onto my Amazon publishing site and seeing some sales have been made. I get it when 5-star reviews turn up on Amazon. I've had 2 of those. Then you're thinking, how many 1-star reviews has he had? Luckily, touch wood, where is some wood there? I haven't had any yet, but time will tell. And of course, these things balance out over time. Any author who's published knows that the book lives or dies by its reviews, especially the ones that are written by professional reviewers. I should have checked, shouldn't I? Any professional reviewers in the audience? Okay, don't need to kick anybody out then, that's a relief. And so, time will tell. And, who am I to say this is the best book ever written about the prisoner? I can't do that. People will decide for themselves. So I get my reward from the feedback that I get. And speaking of feedback, here's how I was going to say cheated. I didn't really. I thought it was quite clever. That I wanted to know, would this novel appeal to prisoner fans and people who'd never seen or heard of The Prisoner, who knew nothing about it? And I thought the only way to do that is to actually give it to some of those people to read before it was published, so that they could feed back to me. So I did that. In December last year, I sent it out to 12 volunteers, people who'd volunteered basically over Facebook and social media to read it. Of the 12, 6 were prisoner fans who knew every detail about The Prisoner. The other 6 had never heard of it, or all they could remember was something about a big white balloon. They all remember that. It's funny, when people who don't remember any of the details in the series, Rover is always remembered. As long as it stays in that corner, I don't mind, or make that dreadful noise. So out it went to them. I gave people 2 or 3 months to read it and feedback. And I'd like to take the opportunity now to thank the 3 who are here at PortmeiriCon this weekend. And that Craig is one of them. Craig Walter, as he mentioned before, he has already read it. Ian French and Gary Murfin. I'm very grateful to them as die-hard Prisoner fans to have read it and to have fed back to me. I'm pleased to say all that feedback was 100% positive. I'm even more pleased to say, if I may just be so bold, that the feedback from the non-Prisoner fans also was 100% positive. So here's, I think, what's going to happen, predicting the future, is the book is not going to satisfy everybody, even though the focus group of 12 were all happy with it. Sooner or later, somebody's going to say, yeah, but it's not enough Prisoner. And some are going to say, yeah, it's a good spy thriller, but actually, what's that big white ball thing that's in the story? And that will happen. So I'm prepared for that. I'm big enough and ugly enough to cope with it. Bring it on. So you might want to know, okay, what's the story about? How does it work? I'm going to read you a couple of chapters, as I did warn you, and nobody left, so you've only got yourself to blame. I'm just reading you these two chapters by way of illustration of how I've taken my approach, which is that most of the book is not set in the village. Most of the book is set in London and in places like Portmeirion in Wiltshire, in the Lonely Pheasant pub in London, and of course the village gets a mention. Of course it does. It gets more than a mention. There's quite a lot happens here, but it happens in the background. The organization that is doing all the strange, mysterious things has its eyes and ears on this place all the time. So they get to see what's going on in the village, just like we did when we watched the television series. In a way, that's what they're doing. They're watching the episodes play out on their monitors at MI6 headquarters in Century House in London. Now, that's a real place. Like I said, I did my research. Century House was apparently London's most well-known secret location in 1967. Ask any taxi driver, where's the Security Intelligence Service headquarters? And they'd say, oh, it's down there, isn't it, on a Century House. I'll take you down there, show you. Extra tip. And it was very well known. There was no way that they could hide it. It's now, of course, even less of a secret because the one in Vauxhall, which opened, I think, around about 1995 and replaced Century House, has appeared in James Bond films. So everybody knows when you pull up at Vauxhall Station on the train, that's where all the spooks work. No more secrets. Right, let me just, first of all, have a quick sip. And no, it's not vodka. And then I will read. So this bit is for you because we're in the village now, and you will recognize some of the places here that I talk about. The situation is, excuse me, this is chapter 8. Our man has been kidnapped. The gas has come through the keyhole. He's been taken away. That's as far as it's got. He hasn't arrived. So we are now in what's called the facility. It's not even known as the village at this stage. Location classified. The sun was still high in the sky. Warmth blanketed the pastel-hued buildings of the pretty hillside village. Seagulls wheeled overhead. The announcement had just been made over the many speakers dotted around the verdant grounds, and marching music now played. But the seagulls weren't the only ones in motion. Throughout the grounds and between the picturesque buildings, people were on the move, walking purposefully towards the building with the domed roof. Well, as purposefully as they could. Many were elderly and most were male, but moving they were. They had been summoned. The piped band music helped them on their way, whether they liked it or not. Crescents of seats had been set up inside the dome, facing a slightly raised dais. In the center of the platform was a freestanding control panel, but nothing more. Dim lighting around the curvature of the dome's interior, around the dome's floor, was the only illumination, apart from a spotlight aimed at the center of the dais. The villagers filed in and took their places, and when everyone was seated, the doors through which they'd entered automatically hummed shut. Any talking dropped to a murmur, and then faded completely as the audience saw a round panel slide open on the floor of the dais. Up through it, with a slight mechanical whirring, came a round black chair, almost a globe, almost a half globe. Its interior upholstered in blue. It was supported on a pedestal. Within it sat a man with black brill-creamed hair and a tanned face. He wore a dark blue jacket and grey flannel trousers. A striped scarf lay casually round his neck, the end thrown over his right shoulder. His garb was at odds with the outfits everyone in the audience wore, which was a variety of bright colours. Some wore straw boaters and capes, some jackets, and many had striped tops. They gave the impression that they were employees of some sort of holiday camp, except there was nothing festive behind why they were there. "Good day to you," the man with the scarf said, his voice smooth and cultured. He rose from the chair. "And welcome. I realize you all know this building, of course, but it's always been off limits. This is probably the one and only time that you'll be in here, and after you've left, you will forget, won't you?" "We will forget," came the automatic response from the audience, speaking as one. They were conditioned to do this and obeyed without question. Their dilated pupils remained focused on the speaker. "Good," said the man in the chair. "I'm here to brief you on what will be happening in the next few days here in your community. It's important to know what's going on so that you can happily remain here, enjoying the life you've all become used to, the life which you all appreciate so much." There was no response from those in the audience. They merely watched the speaker and listened intently to his every word. If there was any concern or unease, it didn't show. "As you know," the man continued, "you've all been given numbers, and from now on, that is the only way you will refer to each other. By number. I, for example, am number 2. But we also have a new person joining us. The new resident will be number 6. He arrives tomorrow and will possibly want to talk to you, to question you. By all means, discuss the weather, or, for example, how to order a taxi. But be very careful in what you tell him. If in doubt, say nothing. Or direct him to me. Within a short time after his arrival, we will be demonstrating our security measures to him. These are, as you're aware, designed to keep you secure, to protect you from, well, uncertainty. So I'd just like to remind you that when you hear the command, 'Be still,' you should immediately stop whatever you are doing, become motionless, and wait until you are told to resume." Number 2 eased himself out of the globe chair and stood facing the audience. He looked around at their placid faces. "As I say, this situation should last only a few days, maybe 2 weeks at the most. After that, life will here return to normal. In the meantime, unity is the key. We will work as one. As one," he emphasized. "In unity lies strength. However, among you there will occasionally be new people, sanctioned individuals who will have specific roles to play. They will usually be here for just a short time. Number 6 will be here for longer, until such time as we feel it prudent to allow him his freedom. Unless, of course, he wishes to stay, as you have all decided to do," Number 2 smiled, although no warmth touched his eyes. "That is all for the moment. Remember what I've told you, but as I said, you were never here. You will forget." Oh, go on, let's all do it. We will forget. We will forget. Oh, I have you now. My work here is done. So the villagers are already there. They have been for quite a while. We get the impression, dilated pupils, there's a bit of a clue. as to why they're so placid, why they don't question anything, why they accept their surroundings. And I continue that theme throughout. I've got another chapter here, though, later on. Now, one of the things that I've been able to do, and this is something that authors are privileged to do, oh goodness, already, is that if real people are no longer with us, and I don't mean to sound flippant here, you can write whatever you like about them. You can't defame the dead. So earlier on, as I said, I was getting into the zeitgeist of 1967. What I wanted to do was introduce an element of plausibility to the whole story. And what that meant was finding real people who were alive then who would have been making decisions that would have affected, for example, the security services. So it usually falls to the Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs to be in charge of the security service, the Security Intelligence Service, MI6. And so in those days it was George Brown. Anybody remember George Brown? Anybody related to George Brown? Oh, thank heavens for that. I'm safe. Because he was an alcoholic. It was very well known. If anybody's ever read Private Eye magazine and remembers the term tired and emotional, which they use, you know that one, tired and emotional, which they use as a way of saying somebody's drunk, they first applied it to George Brown. And so he's in the book. He plays a central role to it. Harold Wilson's in there. He gets a mention. Alec Douglas Hume. At that time, he was the shadow foreign secretary. So we've got real people in this. And we've got the people who featured in the prisoner stories that I mentioned. So those are the people that I deny ripping off ITV about. I acknowledge right in the front of the story here that I am doing a work of fan fiction. I'm hoping that keeps me out of prison. Otherwise, the next time I talk to you will be from behind bars. I will be doing my darndest to escape, as you know. Look, I'm going to have to finish here. I obviously do talk far too much, and Liz, my timekeeper, has already rung the bell for me. So I know you've got far more important and entertaining speakers coming this evening, but since we do have around about 7 or 8 minutes left, are there any questions? Is there something I haven't covered? Oh yes, I know. How much is the book? Look, for you, just £10. You can buy it on Amazon if you don't want to buy one from us tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock here, between 10 and 11, but I can't sign them if you get them from Amazon, and I'll happily dedicate them to you here. Any questions?
Is there a sequel?
Is there a sequel? Yes, there is, and I've started that, yes. But I have to say, it's a good question, is there a sequel? The sequel takes some of the characters that I've invented in this book and has them doing more. In this case, working against the IRA in 1970, so it's set 3 years after. And the good thing about that is I own the characters completely and totally, and I can make as much money as I like, and those books will be £200 each. Good question.